In the past, when Seth told me to trust the spontaneous self, I said, okay, and imagined some hypothetical inner self somehow apart from my conscious intents. But when Seth kept repeating, trust your impulses in this book, I finally got the message through my head, and I've already had considerable physical improvement as a result. This distant-seeming inner self wasn't so distant after all. Quote-unquote it communicated through my impulses. In a way, impulses are the language of the psyche. But what about aggressive or contradictory or even murderous impulses? How can those be trusted? Seth answers those questions and many more, until as we read his explanations, we wonder how we could have so misread our own nature as to distrust the very messages meant to lead us toward our own spiritual growth and that of the species as well. And what is my own part in all of this? I see it as a harking back to the poet's original role, to explore the reaches of his or her private psyche, pushing against usual psychological boundaries until they give, opening up a new mystical territory, the psyche of the people, of the species itself, perceiving a spectacular vision of inner reality that the poet then communicates to the people, translating that vision through words, rhythm, or songs. The earliest poets were probably half shaman, half prophet, speaking for the forces of nature, for the quote-unquote spirits of the living and the dead, voicing their visions of man's unity with the universe. They spoke their messages, sang their songs, chanted their visions aloud. And maybe that's why Seth speaks, communicating first through words, rather than, say, through automatic writing. Seth's books are, first of all, spoken productions. Perhaps the Seth sessions themselves harken back to some ancient time when we received much of our pertinent information about ourselves in just such a fashion. One of us journeying for the others into the quote-unquote mass unconsciousness. A journey that somehow altered and expanded the personality, and then communicating our visions as best we could. If so, though, such altered quote-unquote between-world personalities can be remarkably stable, and if they form according to our ideas of individuality, they can certainly outdo us in their unique complexity. For if Seth is only a psychological model filled out by my unconscious trance material, then he certainly puts our usual concepts of personality to shame, and by implication shows that we ourselves have a long way to go if we are to use our full potential. So I do think more is involved. I think that Seth is a model of ourselves as we know we can be, that he speaks for the part of ourselves that never for a minute believed all that nonsense about flawed selves. As far as my relationship with Seth and his with me, because of our long-standing association, I think we must have formed a unique psychological alliance. Somehow I am part Seth, and in sessions at least, Seth must be part Jane, in a kind of psychological bonding on both sides. Seth must use my voice to speak and my life as reference, and certainly the contents of my mind are vastly expanded as a result of the sessions. My daily life is lived with the knowledge of that association, of course, and my normal routine now includes, quote-unquote, turning into Seth twice weekly, and has for years. This introduction represents my only conscious contribution to this entire book, for example. But certainly, as Seth often states, even the unconscious portions of our personalities are actually conscious. It's all a matter of focus. Not that Seth is just another focus of mine, for it's quite legitimate to say that I am a focus of his consciousness in the same context, but that Seth represents that larger portion of the psyche from which our own kind of consciousness emerges. The point of all this is the exploration of human consciousness, its ranges and scopes. how much does it change as it approaches other levels of actuality? But however we attempt to define Seth's reality, I'm convinced of one thing by now. He is delivering to our conscious minds our deepest unconscious knowledge about ourselves, the world, the universe, and the source of being itself. Not that Seth claims any kind of omnipotence, because he doesn't. His material, however, is clearly providing such translations of unconscious knowledge and intuitive disclosures. Disclosures, according to Seth, no more remarkable than those available in nature itself. But we have forgotten how to read nature's messages. Disclosures no more mysterious than those available in our own states of inspirations. But we've forgotten how to decipher those communications too. Instead, many people are even frightened of inspiration itself. I think that such phenomena were important in evolutionary terms, helping to shape man's consciousness. Not that such material wasn't often distorted or just as often discounted. In any case, it would have to be interpreted again and again so that it applied to the species' experience in time's framework. Talk about psychological complexities. I was just presented with an excellent example of the ideas I've been discussing. As I wrote the previous few paragraphs of this introduction, the words themselves seemed to carry me on with a certain rhythm. I felt as if I were drawing on energy and knowledge beyond my usual capacities. Then, since it was late afternoon, I took a break for a brief nap. More ideas came to me that I scribbled down in the bedroom. The subjective pace quickened and kept accelerating. Then I hit a psychological brick wall, and I could carry the concept no further. At that point, I suddenly recognized Seth, quote-unquote, around the edges of my mind. The next moment, I fell asleep. When I awakened half an hour later, I prepared dinner. Rob and I ate and watched the television news. Then I went back to my study. No sooner did I sit down than such a rich vein of material opened that I could hardly write fast enough to get it all down. And it began where my earlier ideas had ended off. I was being given many of the subject headings for Seth's next book, even as I was writing the introduction for this one. Behind each heading or subject, I sensed realms of information available to Seth, but not in usual terms to me. Yet there had been an earlier moment just before the onrush of material when I sensed an odd psychological threshold, a certain accelerated state, that in this case at least signified the intersection of Seth's thoughts and mine. Then there was a brief point of psychological rest, an almost neutral psychological platform in which Seth's outline began to emerge. Following this, in our next session, Seth confirmed that the material amounted to a partial outline for his projected new book, and that the title I'd quote-unquote picked up while he was still finishing Mass Events was correct. So though he hasn't begun it as of this writing, 2 days later, surely he will start dictating Dreams, Evolution, and Value Fulfillment any day now. My glasses will go off, Seth will say again, "Now, dictation," and Rob will make up a new title page for his notebook. The Seth sessions and Seth's books are inevitably connected to my relationship with Rob, of course. He's far more than a recorder or transcriber of the material. Rob's remarkable mind, with its questions and probing nature, has always stimulated me to do my best, and has served as a kind of invisible but sturdy psychological screen, helping me view myself and the sessions as clearly as possible. If it hadn't been for his encouragement and active participation, I doubt that the Seth sessions would exist in their present form. So while Seth's books go out into the public world, the sessions themselves rise from our private lives. Yet those lives are lived in coexistence with a mass arena of events that brush against us gently at times or drastically affect our days on other occasions. In this book, Seth describes the continuum of existence that holds us all together and blends our private experiences into world events. This is your world and ours. Hopefully, this book will help us all make it a better world. Elmira, New York, September 22nd, 1979.